Yeah. So Dave, what I want to talk about, because we've been talking about it forever, but is about the Mises Caucus and about libertarian unity, because that's really what drew us all together on Twitter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm not the only one who is introduced to the Mises Caucus through Jacob Hornberger. And you brought up how you and Scott Horton were berating him during the campaign. Scott Horton actually shit on Jacob Hornberger when he was on my podcast. I don't know if anyone else caught that, but he was talking,
Yeah, I saw.
saying,
or if you, as a certain friend of ours and former candidate, insisted on doing, putting abolishing Medicare as the highest priority of his campaign. Why are you a libertarian? Well, because I hate poor people more than anyone else. And the more helpless you are, the more I want to take away the slightest bit of help that you get when you and I and everyone knows we live in a system that is entirely tilted toward the people who've already made it. But if you haven't made it and you have nothing, I'm picking on you first because F you. Okay? The pragmatists think that that is a stupid way to be an anarchist and that is counterproductive, then I'm 100% with them.
Hearing you say the stuff you've said on your show, hearing him say that, hearing people from the Mises Caucus realize that is really encouraging, because I actually, when Justin Amash dropped out, I was actually campaigning against Jacob Hornberger, because I honestly would have rather had Vermin Supreme than Jacob Hornberger, because Jacob Hornberger to me was and by the way, Jacob, if you ever watch this, I'd love to have you on the show and talk with you. But he was like emblematic of that fuck poor people image that that everyone has of libertarians, and that's not what I'm hearing at all watching your show. That's not what I'm hearing from the Mises Caucus, and I think a lot of people aren't getting past that wall. They think the Mises Caucus wants to get rid of food stamps even if we can't pull out of Afghanistan, So I think the key to libertarian unity and to bringing people into the movement is unifying on the important issues like ending the wars, ending corporate welfare, ending the war on drugs, a lot of stuff that you've been talking about on your show. So I just wanted people who watch me, who hear me saying that all the time, to hear you say it too. So just kind of give us what you think the Libertarian Party needs to do to be successful in the next few years.
And let me ask just to add on to Reed's, because I want you to expand on it too. You mentioned different priorities among these different sects within the Libertarian Party, and I think that comes from just what they experience as a human being and what they value. Not only what should be important, but how do we coalesce with all of those different priorities?
Well, I think so I think what has to happen is we have to come together on priorities, because if we don't, then the whole thing's a mess and there's nothing that binds us together. And I think that was really the brilliance of the Ron Paul campaign, is that Ron Paul spoke to the moment that he was in. And it was like, well, the priority was obviously ending the wars. The wars were raging on. And then the other priority that he really made was the Federal Reserve. And that may have seemed a little abstract and in theory to people like, who cares about the Fed? But Ron Paul got a fucking, 20,000 20-year-olds chanting "End the Fed." And the reason why that was so relevant was because we just had this huge bust. And he was explaining to people that the Fed is what causes the boom bust. And the Fed is also what finances this whole big government. This is how the whole thing works. This is the lifeblood of the Leviathan, right? Like, this is what you go after. And so I think that he was spot on about that. And I think that for us today, what we have to really attack is like the lockdowns, the government totalitarianism. I think that we have to attack the culture war from the perspective that we were talking about before, that we have the answer to call a truce and de-escalate this, because it's really tearing the country apart, and people know about that. And then the wars and the Fed, because they're both the worst things ever. And anything else about that, naked government authoritarianism that's ruining people's lives, the war on drugs, anything like that, like, of course, like, I think, should be a priority. But I completely agree with Reed, and the fact that Scott said that on your show is what's making me a little bit more free to say it on your show. And I really, like, as I said before, I'm a little bit torn on this because I want to be loyal. and not like throw Jacob under the bus. But dude, just so you know, because I just think it's more important right now for the movement for me to tell the truth. And I mean, Scott stormed out of meetings, like a meeting, like just like this, not being recorded with like the four of us here, where Scott stormed out of the fucking room and wouldn't come back. And Scott like he was furious about the Medicare thing, and he was right, and I was too. I mean, I would never focus on, especially in an environment like this, like what's happened in the last, the last year, over the crumbs that poor people get.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I'd want to make an argument that, look, if you're relying on these crumbs, these crooks are always going to give more money to their friends than they give to you. But I not only do I not want to rail against that, I'm not even sure I would want to take that away immediately. I mean, like, these are desperate times. And if the government's put you out of work for a year, I'm not sure that they don't owe you something.
Right.
I mean, it's like, it's like, I think Bob Murphy made this comparison, but it's like, like we might be against eminent domain, or we are against eminent domain, but we're not against someone being compensated after eminent domain takes their home, right? Like, no, you have to compensate them if you're going to take their home away from them. So if you're going to shut down someone's business, then there's a libertarian argument even that they should get something. So I wouldn't even focus on that. I mean, I would just focus on like, end the wars, end the lockdowns, end the corporate welfare, and and then seriously talk about the financial system and how much they're screwing over the American people. I want an audit of the Federal Reserve in an attempt to ultimately end it. I want to end legal tender laws so that we can let cryptocurrency actually have a shot at this thing. I mean, like, that's what I think we should be going after, and I think that's where my priorities would be.